But the topic at hand is how to close 6- and 7-figure opportunities faster for your agency. This will give you a little bit of what the agenda here today is going to be. Obviously, we're going to jump in and do some more introductions. Then I'm going to provide a little bit of background on kind of what I'm seeing in the space and why and how this has become a challenge and an issue. Then we're going to talk about what you can be doing before, during, and after the meetings that you have with prospects in order to try to move those along more quickly. Then we're going to spend a good 20, 25 minutes on Q&A. So if you have any questions, I'm assuming you can put it in the chat. And then we do have a giveaway that we're going to be doing at the end of this webinar as well. So please, stick around to the end and we'll go ahead and we'll do that. So with that said, let's get into introduction. So some of you may be on my newsletter or follow me on social and know who I am. Others don't. But for everybody, my name is Banach, and I am the Principal and Chief Growth Officer of a company that I very creatively named Banach. What we do is we help agencies and MarTech companies to predictably land 6- and 7-figure opportunities and really help them unlock their full potential. And a little bit about me, I founded and operated an experiential and event marketing company, which I started actually in high school and did that for about 15 years. After that agency, I had gone and started working for other agencies, particularly in the business development function. And that's the area when I had my business that I really enjoyed most. So I worked for independent agencies, some holding company agencies, but along the way, I have prospected, pitched, and closed, millions of dollars of business with companies like Red Bull and Molson Coors and Constellation Brands, among many, many others. But what I've discovered along the way is that, the superpower that I have is really around the prospecting side of things. So really the top of the funnel, lead generation. While that may not be the sexiest, everybody really talks about the pitch and the close. I think one of the most critical, if not the most critical parts to all of this is generating the leads, because if you don't have the leads, you're not going to be able to close anything in the first place. So along the way, Outbound has become a really key and integral part of everything that I do. And, really interested and excited to be able to share some of those insights here with you all today. So that said, a little bit more about our company. So we work with advertising agencies, MarTech companies. Like I said, we work in a couple different capacities. We work on a consulting and training basis to help them with the people, the process, and the technology that they may need to get an outbound business development or outbound sales function up and running in their firm. And then we also work with clients on more of an outsource model. So we have services around cold outbound. So think of that as reaching out to companies that you don't have a relationship already in order to try to, start a relationship. And then we also have what we call warm outbound services, where that's really tapping into the networks or other contacts that you might have prior engagement with, and we help to try to warm those up and re-engage them for you. To give you a little bit of perspective on, some of the clients that we're working with. So we work with some, really top agencies such as Energy BBDO, Vice Media, Barkley, and our responsibility really is to help them open up doors at brands like you see those on the bottom, which are all ones that we've either set meetings with, had opportunities with, or our clients have won business with, recently. So with that said, enough, about me. Let's get into the topic at hand, which is about how to close 6- and 7-figure opportunities for your agency. So before we get into that, like I said, I want to give a little bit of background on, why this topic is important and why aren't these leads perhaps closing faster? So I think it's important to take a step back and understand the buyer's journey, and I know most of us come from the agency space, so we've probably not unfamiliar with this term, but sometimes you think about it for your clients, you don't always think about it for yourself. But the definition of a buyer journey is really the active research process that a buyer goes through leading up to a purchase, right? One doesn't just decide, that they're going to buy something. At least when we're talking about a B2B service, it's not an impulse buy that you're at the, checkout line of a grocery store and you decide to buy, a $500,000 marketing services. So there is an entire journey that they will go on before they make that purchase. Now, what has changed over, specifically, really the last 10 years or more is the buyer's journey used to be where, they would have to engage with a salesperson in order to even learn about, your products or your services. But nowadays with the internet, 70 to 90% of the buyer's journey is actually completed prior to ever even engaging a vendor. If a prospect is perhaps interested in a service, they can very easily go onto the internet and do a ton of different research, and essentially get really far down the channel before they decide, they're even wanting to talk to you. So it's made our job more difficult because a lot of prospects now don't want to talk to a salesperson in the first place anymore. They would rather do it on their terms and their time. So it's harder and harder to cut through these days because of that. So this is a really great graphic that illustrates this, and this is by Gartner. And when you think about the buyer journey, a lot of times you think of this linear process that would start with, in the orange section, problem identification, and they search for a solution, they decide on the requirements, and then they make their selection, right? But if only it were, that easy and that linear. The reality of it is it's very messy, and people can start the process, in any one of these different buckets. It could start from their own online research. It could come from seeing somebody speak about a topic. It could come from social media. There's all different ways that somebody could start, and it isn't necessarily linear either, right? They may be kind of bouncing in and out and up and down in these different areas. So I share this because, sometimes I think when we are in the sales role, we want the sale to happen tomorrow, right? But we don't necessarily always remember that there is all this other process that goes on. So I think it's good to be mindful and aware of this, and it'll be really helpful when you start to think about what you could be doing to move these deals along faster, just knowing the world that these folks are living in. I also want to share a little bit more about inbound versus outbound, because at least in our world, most of the clients that we work with have come from more of an inbound model. Their outbound is usually, when they come to us, outbound is probably the first time they're really doing outbound at least a level of some scale. They might have dabbled with it before. So think about an inbound lead and the difference between an outbound lead. An inbound lead comes from a client that's reaching out to your organization, inquiring about your products or services, right? So they've done that 70 to 90% of the research already. And for one reason or the other, they've identified you as someone that they want to reach out with. So they already, have a need, and they've already identified some potential vendors that they want to speak with, which is very different from outbound. Outbound is where it's the result really of a prospecting effort to a contact that hasn't necessarily expressed interest in your product or service that you are offering. They may not even know that they have a problem yet, and that might be part of what you need to be doing in the sales process, is to help them identify the problem. They may know they have a problem, but they may not know all the available solutions to that problem. So you need to identify, why your solution is perhaps the best solution. So there's a lot of other steps that happen in the outbound process versus the inbound process. And there's not to say that one is better than the other. And I think, this graphic does a really good job of explaining that. So this actually was inspired by a book called Sticky Branding. And in Sticky Branding, in the book, they talk about only 3% of the total addressable market is an active buyer at any given time. So I call this to me is really, this is inbound, right? This is those that have already, they know that they have a problem, they know of a solution, they're out there looking for it. So that is the top 3%. And that's really where, if you're going after that 3%, it's really more about a demand capture. It's about, it's trying to put yourself out there that you are a solution that they should be looking for. However, it's also very challenging to do that because they have done so much research. They probably already have a short list of vendors, and now you're trying to insert yourself into that conversation when they may be very far along that process already. So with outbound, I like to talk about focusing on the other 97% of the total addressable market. So these are companies that, maybe intend to change, that's like 7%, or they maybe have a need, but they aren't ready to act just yet, or they don't have a current need, but they will. And then there's probably another 30% that realistically will never buy anything from your organization. That's just, reality, unfortunately. But that still leaves you with a good 67% of the market that could become a customer. But again, they may not know they have a problem yet. They may not know that you're a solution to that problem. So this is where outbound can be really, really great, because if you can reach out to them and connect with them before they start that research process or before they get too far along, you can oftentimes, put yourself into a situation where, you win the business or you win a project before they even realize that there are other vendors out there. You start to build a relationship with them. So that said, the process does take a little bit longer because their need may not be urgent for them to solve in that moment like it would be with an inbound lead, but there's a lot more prospects that are available to you to target and go after. So with that said, how do we convert those opportunities faster? How do we target those 97% that may not have an immediate need and make them convert faster? So that's what we're going to unpack here today. So I like to think of this really in three buckets. The first is, what can we do before the meeting to put ourselves in a better position? What can we do during the meeting? And then finally, what can we do after the meeting? And depending on why you signed up to this webinar, you may be thinking that I'm just going to be talking about what to do after the meeting, which is where a lot of people's heads go. But if you've done everything right in the beginning and during, the after meeting almost sometimes takes care of itself. So let's jump into that. So when we're talking about before the meeting, there's really three areas, and we're going to unpack each one of these, but I call it designating a driver, booking a pre-call, and brainstorming possible advances. So I'm going to go over each one of these here. So when we're talking about designating a driver, what I mean by that is that to have one person that is involved in the process, in that sales process, in that buyer journey, from the first meeting that you have with them down to when they finally sign on the dotted line, is having that continuity across the board. Now, I know depending on your model, you might have an SDR, BDR model, so somebody that's maybe setting up the meeting for an AE, which is fine. I'm just saying is from that first meeting, though, you need to have some consistency all the way to the end. And the reason for it is, I think, really highlighted well by this graphic that from LinkedIn. So this is from a report that they did where they identified reasons why buyers give for vendor relationships getting stronger. And this was a very long list. I just pulled off the top 5, but in particular, the ones that I want to focus in on is the top 2, which is trust and personal relationships. So while yes, this is a business to business environment, at the end of the day, we're dealing with humans. We're dealing, and it is a personal relationship like that, as you can see, is what will strengthen that relationship. So if you have every time you meet with a prospect, a different person, in the call and leading the call, it's really difficult to build trust and build that personal relationship. Obviously, you're going to probably bring in, again, depending on your product or service, other experts onto the call throughout the sales process, which is totally fine. But you do want to have that one common person that is really, quarterbacking this relationship, if you will. And by building that trust and that personal relationship up, you're going to tend to see that those deals in the end will convert faster. The second point is about booking a pre-call. So again, I know we have a variety of different types of audience here today, but the idea of a pre-call is, it depends again on the type of calls. We work with a lot of our clients who are scheduling what we call insights meetings. So the first engagement might be an hour-long presentation that they're giving to share, insights about, the industry or about a target audience or about something of interest to the prospect. So that's kind of on one side. You may be booking, a quick 30-minute demo about, a SaaS product that you may have. So really, regardless of, what you're selling, though, the idea of a pre-call here, and it doesn't always have to be in the form of a call. It could also be in the form of an email. But the idea here is that before you get on the call with them and do your demo or do your insights meeting, is that you try to allocate, even if it's a quick 10-minute chat, just to align on the objectives and expectations. Because if you can get a few bits of information from them leading into that demo or leading to the insights meeting, and then tailor it specifically to what they're experiencing, you're going to see much better outcomes come from that meeting versus doing something that's, overly off the shelf or, just too cookie cutter that for everybody. So, my team, who again, we have a large team that is doing this type of outreach for agencies and MarTech companies. We always push, hey, we want to make sure that your team gets the most out of this meeting. Are you open to a brief 10-minute chat to align on objectives and expectations? I will say you're not always going to get it. Sometimes, you're lucky just to score the meeting in the first place, but we always will book the meeting and then we will try to push for the pre-call. And when we can get those calls end up, just being more robust and again, leading to faster closes in the end. The third item that I want to bring up before the meeting is the concept of advances and continuations. And this was really popularized by a book called Spin Selling, which some of you may be aware of. Neil Rackman was the author of that. And the idea here is an advance is a significant action that requires energy by the prospect, either in the call or right after it, that moves the sale towards a decision. And I'll come back to that in a second. A continuation, on the other hand, is where the sale will continue, yet no specific action has been agreed upon by the customer to move it forward. So let me give you an example of this. So an advance may be at the end of the call, you agree that next Tuesday at 10:30, everybody's going to meet again. John Smith, the CFO, is going to be on the call as well, and you're going to talk about A, B, and C, right? So something it's a significant action. It requires energy, right? And there's something very specific that's going to happen as a next step. A continuation, on the other hand, is, again, to use an example at the end of the call, the prospect may say, hey, this is really great information. Let us digest this and we'll get back to you. Right? It doesn't necessarily mean that it won't move forward, but there isn't a situation where there's been a specific action that's been agreed upon between the two. So we always advise that you want to get an advance. And how do you get an advance? And that's where, before you even have the meeting, you want to be thinking about what are the possible advances, what are the likely next steps and outcomes that could happen from this call. Obviously, depending on your product or service, that is going to range on what that is. But you want to start thinking about that. Is that an introduction perhaps to a senior executive on the team? Is that a demo? Is that an assessment? Is that to go over your capabilities? So you want to have a whole toolbox of different options, and depending on how the conversation goes and what they lean into or what they pull back from, you want to be able to offer that throughout the meeting as what you can do for your next step. So again, brainstorm those in advance so you're not trying to come up with those on the fly, because I know you get excited, you're doing your thing, and then next thing you know, you run out of time and you end up in a situation where you're just, again, you're just hoping that they get back to you in a week or two or whatever the time frame is. So those are the three ideas in terms of before the meeting on what to do. Now let's talk about what to do during the actual meeting. So during the meeting, the three items that we'll unpack here are setting an upfront contract, asking the right discovery questions, and obtaining commitment. So first, the idea of setting an upfront contract. So an upfront contract, this concept was popularized by the Sandler Sandler selling system. So some of you may have heard this already. But an upfront contract is essentially an agreement made at the outset of a meeting about what will take place at that meeting. It's going to clarify each person's roles and their positions, and it really gets you in a situation where you can take control of that meeting right out of the gates. So the 5 elements of what goes into one of these upfront contracts is, number one, what is the purpose of the meeting? Then what is their agenda? So the prospect's agenda and expectations, you want to make sure that you're clear on that. You also want to share what your expectations are of the meeting. You want to just collaborate and make sure the time and logistics are right. The last thing you want to do is your expectation, it's a 1-hour call, and then the prospect thinks it's 30 minutes and halfway through they shut you down. So you want to, even though there's calendar invites and all of that, you want to make sure that you're all on the same page. And then probably the most important part is the outcome, right? And that goes back to those advances. So at the end of this call, this is what is going to happen for next steps. So you want to set that up front with them. And why I like this idea of the upfront contract is, again, number one, it puts you in the position, take control. It sets those expectations. But what happens oftentimes at the end of these calls, right? You end up running out of time. You got a minute left. Everybody is scrambling. However, you've set this upfront contract up. It's a lot easier to go back when there's a minute or two left. Hey, I know we're coming short on time. As I mentioned in the beginning, we talked about next steps being A, B, and C. What makes most sense, or something to that nature that you can go. So it's a lot easier to reference that back after you've already set it up front. So, just to give you, a little bit of an example of what we do here when we're prospecting for ourselves. So to other agencies or to MarTech companies, we might say something like, hey, we appreciate you taking the time to meet with us to discuss, innovative approaches that agencies are taking to land 6- and 7-figure opportunities. After the session, you're going to have some new ideas on how to grow and break into new industries. We prefer to make this conversational versus a presentation. So please do ask questions along the way. And at the end of the session, we're going to go over and give you the opportunity to dive deeper into our case studies or our capabilities. And perhaps a subsequent call. And just so we're clear, we've scheduled this for an hour. We're going to do 45 minutes of presentation and then 15 minutes of Q&A. Does that still work with your calendar? Okay, great. And then we might close it with, hey, this session ultimately is going to allow us to know if we are a fit for each other. We want to let you know at the end, it's okay to say no, and no decisions or anything have to be made immediately. So we like to kick all of our calls off with something along those lines. Obviously, you're going to want to tailor it to your specific firm yourself. But it really, again, you can see how something like that really aligns that call and puts you in control and starts to set the table for what those next steps are going to be. And if you have those next steps and if they're clear, again, it just moves this process along faster. The next item I have here is about asking the right discovery questions. So this graphic here is from Gong. Gong, if you're not familiar, is a sales intelligence platform and conversation intelligence platform, I should say. And what they essentially do is they use AI to analyze recorded calls on their system, so recorded Zoom calls. And what they do is then they analyze those calls and they find insights and best practices, such as what is the ideal talk time between the rep and the buyer? And in this case, how many questions are the right number of questions to lead to success? So you'll see on the left side is the success rate. So how success meaning that meeting advances to another meeting. And then you'll see on the bottom is the number of questions. So as you see, asking 1 to 6 questions is actually the lowest. Only 46% turns into a positive outcome. Then you see it starts to go up to 66 with 7 to 10. And then the sweet spot is 11 to 14 questions, so 74%. And then you see a drop off. So I think this is interesting to share here. So number one, you better be asking questions. So that's sort of a given, but I want to make sure that that's clear. This is not, you don't want to just have a presentation that you're just, shooting a bunch of information at them. You want to have that engagement. That's going to start to build trust. That's going to allow you to tailor your answers better. So first and foremost, make sure you're asking questions. But beyond that, you don't want to ask too little and you don't want to ask too many. You really want to find that sweet spot. One caveat I do want to share here is that this graphic is based on more small to mid-sized businesses. I know we have some agencies that are targeting more enterprise businesses. So if you are more enterprise, the number actually is more in that 7 to 10 range is the sweet spot. But the idea with both of these is that at some point, there's a drop off. You don't want to ask too many questions because then it starts to feel like an interrogation or a job interview. So you want to make sure that yes, you're asking questions, but they're thoughtful questions. So again, this could be some of your pre-call homework is figuring out what are those questions. You probably want to have some stock questions that you're pretty much always asking prospects, but then depending on who they are, depending on the research that you've done, you're going to want to tailor it, based on the conversation. And certainly when you are in the middle of the conversation, you want to be able to drill down a layer or two deeper in the questions that you ask. So, again, if you've done your job here and you're asking a lot of questions, you're going to have just so much better information to go back with and lead to those next steps. And then the third point here is about obtaining commitment. So this is related back to what I shared originally about the continuations and the advances. So I talked about some of the advances maybe being introduction to the executive management, scheduling a demo, agreeing to an assessment. So the idea here in this stage is you've done the brainstorming. Now you actually got to do it right in the actual meeting. So this chart is something that you might want to use for some inspiration. But the idea here is that you have your list, and let's just take the first one for example. It's getting introduced to executive management. And how do you measure if that happened? Well, that's pretty easy. Did that introduction actually happen? But the next couple of columns here is where I think this gets really interesting is identifying what is the impact of that advance on moving the sale forward. So perhaps for your business, getting introduced to the executive management is really high impact versus just scheduling a demo with maybe that someone that's more junior level isn't that big of an impact. So you want to keep in mind that not all advances are created equal. So you want to know which are the biggest impact. You also want to know how achievable is this based on who you're talking to. Maybe it's really unrealistic to get a lead to the executive manager versus scheduling the demo. So you're going to want to kind of, think about what is the balance between the two. But ideally then what you're going to do the impact, you're going to do achievability, and then you're going to rank, all right, this is the best choice. This is the second best choice, the third best choice. So you're going to want to go into the meeting, with that. And the way I like to do it is in the back of my head, I'm trying to push for that first one throughout the meeting by the questions that I ask and just putting out some feelers, throughout the conversation. And if I feel like that probably is not the right way to go, then I'm going to, backtrack a little bit, and I'm going to move towards maybe the second best choice. And then you kind of just move your way, down the chain until hopefully you at least have something, but ideally you have what your best choice was. So those are the three for during the meeting. And now let's talk about what to do after the meeting, right? And this may be where your head again was at from the beginning, was we were going to talk about what to do after the meeting to close faster. But hopefully you're starting to see, if you've done those things before and you've done those things during, that actually after kind of can take care of itself. So what are the things after a meeting? So the first we'll talk about is staying top of mind. The second is to continue following best practices. And the third is to have patience. So staying top of mind, again, this may be where your head was at when registering for this, but lead nurturing, which again, a lot of marketing agencies on here. So you probably know it's the process of developing and maintaining relationships with clients at every stage of their journey. And that's usually done through marketing and communications messaging. So again, think back to that buyer's journey that we saw from Gartner. It's messy. There's a lot of different steps. Some people may prefer video. Some people may prefer written content. Some people may prefer face-to-face. There's a lot of different ways to engage. There's a lot of different types of content. What they're going to need top of the funnel may be different at bottom of the funnel. So you want to think about a content strategy for different types of buyers across different mediums, across different types of, across the funnel, so to speak. So to share, a couple things that we've seen success with internally for us, I think of them as marketing and sales in two different buckets. So from a marketing standpoint, we have an email newsletter. I know somebody had mentioned earlier that they were subscribed to our newsletter. Well, that's a tool that we've been using to stay top of mind with prospects. We use it for prospects. We also use it then for those that we've actually met with, but it's something that we send out on a weekly basis. I write a short kind of motivational story along with a quote. I provide some industry news, in particular with some CMO changes that have happened, and a lot of agencies like to track that and see if that might be a potential lead for them. There's nothing salesy in the message. The most salesy we'll ever get is maybe an invite to a webinar like this, but we're not trying to sell anything in that newsletter. And it's been just a really great way to stay top of mind with a large number of prospects on a consistent basis. So that's the email newsletter. So I think, thinking through something like that, might be good for your company. Another thing to look at perhaps is targeted ads on LinkedIn. LinkedIn has tremendous capabilities in terms of targeting. So if you've met with somebody, again, we're working a lot with enterprise businesses at Procter & Gamble. You can literally go in there and you can run targeted ads to marketers at Procter & Gamble. So this allows you to not only get back into the front of the people that you met with, but also perhaps other decision makers or influencers that might be involved in the process. They say that there could be in enterprise level sales, 8 to 10 different people that weigh in on a decision to buy a product or services. So, so expanding yourself beyond maybe the person or two you met with is also very valuable, and LinkedIn is a great way to do that. The third thing to think about from a marketing standpoint might be to have some lead scoring or visitor tracking into your website. Again, you might meet with a prospect and then, I don't know, you don't hear from them, for a while. It would be great to know 2 months from now that they hit your website and they downloaded a piece of content or they visited your blog or something like that. So those types of tools are really great to give you an alert to know that, hey, these people are thinking of you, and that might be a trigger for you then to reach back out to them. And then on the sales side, a couple of things to think about, so we have our email newsletter, which is more of a mass email that goes out, but we like to do on a sales side, maybe every 30 days to write something really relevant and personalized. So this is not something that's mass. This is not auto-generated. This is really one of our reps taking the time to write something personal. So, you might want to then research the prospect, research their industry, research the company itself, find something that's really relevant and share it with them. And the idea here is it's not, the email is not centered around, hey, we want to meet with you. It's really just about adding some value back to that, just to ping them and stay top of mind. And hopefully, if timing has changed and it is a better time, they're going to see that and they're going to reach back out to you. And I love getting the response, hey, this is really great timing. Glad you responded. That's the type of responses you want to hear from that. And then, related, you want to be doing the same thing on LinkedIn. LinkedIn's a great resource then to first and foremost, make sure you're connecting with all these prospects that you've met with. I can't tell you how many clients of ours have just, forgotten to connect with these prospects. So make sure you're connecting first and foremost, and then keep your eyes on them, right? If they are posting anything, make sure you're commenting and liking on that. Don't be salesy again, just comment and like, and then make sure you're posting content that's adding value back so they see your name pop up on their feed every so often as well. But I think between, kind of marketing and on the sales side, you want to have a touch point, ideally, I would say on the marketing side, weekly with some sort of form of newsletter or an ad. And then on the sales side, hopefully every 30, maybe 60 days, again, depending on your sale, depending on, kind of where they're at in the process. The next point that I want to say after the meeting to think about is to continue following all these best practices. This is not what I've shared today is not just about the first meeting. What I've shared about is the second meeting, the third meeting, the fourth meeting. We use the analogy here about baseball. The first meeting is getting to first base, but that is not the goal. The goal is to get the runner to score, which is to get to home plate. So there is going to be a second base, a third base, and then eventually they're going to score. So you need to be thinking about how am I going to get that runner over from first base to second base, right? And when you get that second meeting, you still want to make sure you have that designated driver. You still may want to think about having a pre-call, even though you had another meeting. There might be other influencers or decision makers on that call. That person you had that initial meeting with might be the champion that can help, give you some insights into how to make that second call even more robust and valuable. You still want to think about advances. They're going to be different probably in your second and third meeting than they were your first, but you still want to do that. You're still setting upfront contracts. You still want to be thoughtful in your questions. You still want to be attaining commitment at the end of the call, and you're still going to need to be staying top of mind. So again, it doesn't end just in the first call. I know we put all this energy into getting that first call, but we should be putting just the same amount of energy in those second and third and subsequent calls. And then the last thing that I'll share is have patience, right? Especially when we're talking enterprise level. I mean, we're seeing, there could be sales cycles of 6 months, 12 months, sometimes 18 months before prospects are ready to buy, which is a long time. However, we have to just be grounded. And as long as you're continuing to fill the funnel up, good things are going to happen along the way. And if you're following all these best practices, good things are going to happen. Sometimes, I hear, well, outbound, it takes too long. Inbound, is much faster. And I have a counter argument to that. Inbound, maybe from the point you speak with them until when it closes, it might be faster, but inbound takes a ton of time upfront to build all the content and to, start ranking for SEO and to build your reputation and to get the media, to get all of that word of mouth before somebody could even find you in the first place. So that could be months, if not years, or even longer to get that in the first place. So they're just a little bit different, but at the end of the day, have patience, trust the process, and you're going to be putting yourself in a really good situation. So that concludes the presentation. I know we have scheduled some time here for Q&A. So I don't know, Christian, if you want to lead that off for us here.
Yeah. So can you stop sharing your screen?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that was, wow, that was a lot, at least for me, a lot of stuff that's highly actionable. Drop a fire in the chat if you feel the same, that Christian dropped some great tips. So we'll and also, by the way, we'll send this recording out afterwards, so you'll be able to watch the entire thing for because it was a lot, so many things you'll be able to view back. Think about what Christian can answer that you're currently struggling with in your agency. We're going to answer some questions now, so think a little bit about that and drop them in the chat if you have questions. We'll start off with some pre-sent questions, and the first one that I'm also wondering. So you mentioned, Christian, that 97% of that market is kind of not doing research actively at any given point. And Amit, who I believe is attending today, is asking, what's the best channel to reach out to those 97%. And someone else also asked, is it LinkedIn? Is it cold email? Is it cold calling? Is it all of them? So a multi-channel approach. And by the way, we have a bunch of fires in the chat, Christian. So
Great. Great. Well, thank you, everybody, and thanks for all the fires. Yeah. So in terms of what the best channel is, I'm obviously biased into outbound. However, I think first and foremost, you really got to understand, if you're it might be very different if you're somebody that's selling a $5,000 product versus, $1 million service, like some of the clients that we have. So I think, I don't think there's one best channel. It's really going to depend on the company and the services, that you happen to offer. But if we're talking more specifically, about, enterprise, which was the topic, here today, the bigger 6- and 7-figure type of deals, what we see the most success with is really, email and phone. LinkedIn is a great tool that we use for researching. We do some outreach on LinkedIn. However, what we've seen, at least from the enterprise level, is that those prospects might all have profiles on LinkedIn. They're not necessarily using it as an active channel to engage and communicate with people. Now, again, every industry is a little bit different in what you're targeting. I know salespeople are very active on LinkedIn, but a lot of the marketers that we're targeting aren't nearly as active on LinkedIn. So I think the biggest thing is, we like to take a multi-channel approach, and you test and learn. Part of the metrics you should be checking is, where are the meetings that you're coming up with? What channels are they directly coming from? Which one are they getting influenced by? And after you run this for a while, do more of what's working and do less of what's not.
Got it. That makes sense. It also part of another question that ties into this one well is, so these people are not actively looking to buy. So from what I understood, you do not recommend being overly salesy about it, since they are not really in the market. Greg is asking, what are the best ways to get an authentic conversation started? So get some kind of a relationship going rather than boom, a sales pitch.
Yeah. Great question. So yeah, to kind of tie a couple things together, while yes, they may not actively be buying, everybody's got challenges that they're experiencing. I don't know any business or any person that isn't experiencing some sort of challenge. So I think it's really important, first and foremost, to do your research and understand, what are the problems that this industry is typically facing that you're targeting, or what type of, even getting granular down to the individual, this certain buyer persona, what are the challenges that they're typically experiencing. And while, again, they may not sometimes realize that they have that challenge or actively, trying to solve it, if you can come to them and add value from the beginning about, hey, we think you might be experiencing this challenge. We've got something really interesting or different that you might want to take a look at. And we found that type of an approach where we try to, we call it kind of making a deposit before you ask for a withdrawal. So, you're doing some research, you think they might have a challenge, and we have an insight session. We have some unique, a proprietary process, something, again, where you're going to try to share and give them something with no strings attached to it. It's really just to start a relationship first and foremost. And to kind of add to that, I like the quote of, be interested instead of be interesting, meaning that, ask questions, truly, be curious about their industry and want to be helpful versus when I say be interesting is more about us, so we don't want to make it about us. You want to make it about them, and constantly just be asking yourself, what's in it for them. And if you continue to think that through and add value to them, I think, those types of conversations where they are authentic will sort of naturally happen from there.
Yeah, that makes sense totally. All right. The next question comes from Martha. Any suggestion for engaging multiple stakeholders after the meeting? Maybe not the decision maker, but influencers. I'm going to unmute you, Martha, just in case you want to expand on that, but I think it's pretty self-explanatory, the question.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
That's good. Go ahead.
Yeah, so great. Well, really good question. So yeah, I think, assuming that these individuals were not on, the sales call that you had originally, I think there's a number of different things. I think you're gonna have to tread water lightly, right? It's going to be kind of depend on what the outcome of that call was. If it's a situation where that there may be someone else that you should be talking to, but that individual you spoke with, didn't necessarily provide that introduction, to you. I think that's probably maybe where your head's at with this. So, I think what we've done in the past is, again, you want to be tactful with it, but, cold email is a really good channel, again, to reach out and be transparent, right? And just say, hey, we met with, so-and-so on your team. We had a really robust conversation. They shared, A, B, and C, and then I think, again, it goes back to, what value can you provide them? And then think that through and try to offer that as well, to them. But now that you have that intel that you've gathered on that first call, you can be much more hyper targeted into that outreach that you're going to have because of the insights that you gathered from that first call. So I think it's, perfectly fine, if to reach out to others, whether that, again, is through LinkedIn or cold email or cold calling, any of the channels, but I would be, generally I would probably try to be transparent though, and that you've met with some others on the team and this is what you've learned. And we've seen some success, doing that in the past.
Yeah, we've had to tread lightly there, just to make sure, we're not stepping on toes of the person who was running the meeting or whatever.
Yeah, and you do, and every situation is a little bit unique in that, certainly have been there as well, but I think generally speaking, I think it's okay. Yeah.
Awesome, thanks, Martha. So maybe along the same lines, Jonathan is asking about your best advice for when a prospect goes cold after verbally agreeing to move forward with a pilot project. Sure.
Yeah. This happens, unfortunately, right? I think obviously, you're going to want to give them a little bit of space. We all have our own timelines that we want, to have, and not all the times is that what the prospects is. So I think part of it is, it's the same sort of concept though, is making sure that you're getting all the information up front to know what is their timeline. Sometimes, we don't ask those questions. We make assumptions, ask if there's other decision makers that, are involved in this decision-making process. So if you've done those types of things first, like sometimes that in and of itself helps. But that's not to say that, there won't be situations where they sort of ghost you, anyways. So I'll share in this, one thing that comes to mind is just a tactic that I've used successfully, that is sort of a little bit of a Hail Mary, but Chris Voss, who is an FBI hostage negotiator, wrote a really great book that I recommend everybody check out called Never Split the Difference. And he shares a tactic in there about just sending an email that literally just says, have you given up on this project? That's it. No further context, nothing else included with it. And, to be honest with you, when I first read it, I'm like, I don't know if this is going to work. I don't know. It just didn't seem like it, but, desperate as we are sometimes in sales, I gave it a shot and it worked. And you would be really surprised at the number of times that just something quick and short like that has actually worked with that exact wording. And I think the psychology of that is, again, more times than not, they're not necessarily ghosting because they're bad people. They're waiting for some bits of information, something changed in their organization. And, rather than just be kind of transparent and upfront about that, they kind of just hide and wait for it. But I found that type of an email is really effective at, getting them, and all of a sudden they're going to open up. No, we didn't give up on it yet. We're just waiting for this, or our budget was slashed and now we're waiting for that. So, so I think, keep that in your toolbox as a little bit of a trick, and take it not just from me, but from an FBI hostage negotiator.
I started reading that book, by the way. I wonder if when you send that message, because it's such a popular book, how many people are going to recognize that advice. We have a question from Alan, and since he's here and his camera's on, we're giving him priority. So Alan, I'm not sure if it's 100% clear. Would you like to ask it live? I'm asking you to unmute now.
Yeah, I was, because there was a distinction between cold and inbound. And we were looking at the pyramid of the inbound of, getting people to a point where they would be interested. I'm just wondering, because that sounds to me more like a demand generation thing. Just wondering what methods you found best. I mean, that have worked best in that area, if that's clear. Did I?
Sure. Yeah, I think I follow that. I'll caveat this. I mean, our expertise is really more in the outbound side. That's where I think we really shine. However, we're doing it for our own company here, and I can share a couple of things that I think we've done that has really worked out well for us. I did mention, that newsletter. That has been a really I would say the single-handedly most effective thing that we've done for our business. Just something that stays top of mind, that's not salesy. Prospects are smart, if there's some level of interest, they'll figure out what you do. And so I think some form of that would be something to explore. From a content creation standpoint, at least with our market, most everybody recognizes that they need more leads and for whatever the reason happens to be. But there's a lot of different ways to generate leads. Outbound is just, one of, multiple ways that one can do it. So the way we look at it as, we write on a monthly basis, and we're trying to, increase this right now. We just pick apart a very, very granular problem that we believe that Outbound can solve for them. So, we have articles written about, what happens if you have a guerrilla client that makes up 25% or more of your audience, right? So it's a very specific problem. And then in the article introduces the solution, being Outbound. We have another one that's coming out here soon about, what if you're trying to break into new categories? So taking, really very specific problems and making content around it. And then we push that out on our social channels. We push it out in the email list that we have. We're going to be starting to run ads specifically for that. So, really kind of poking at that pain point. Now, that really requires you to understand what the pain points are of your audience. And I think we do know that really well of our audience because we all kind of come from that industry. But I think that's another thing that's been really successful, to be very, very hyper specific in the problem, because there are so many. It's not just, hey, we need more leads, it's taking it two layers deeper. So I think thinking about that for your audience and the problems they have and creating content around that has been effective.
It seems like that answers your question, Alan, right? Awesome. Right, so we'll do two more questions, which are very nice. So one comes from Quentin, who's also attending. So 6 and 7 figure potential clients are very busy and in touch with a lot of agencies. So how and where in the process can I stand out?
Yeah, great question. Yes, they are. That is, I mean, everybody's busy, but it's exponentially more challenging to break into some of the enterprise level businesses because it's even more noisy, in their inboxes. So I think, my suggestion really there is the more specific, I think you can get away with being more of a generalist when you're targeting small and mid-sized businesses. But when you're going after more enterprise level, so those bigger 6 and 7 figure deals, you really need to be a specialist. Because those companies, while yes, they're very busy, they do have challenges just like everybody else. They have more challenges probably than anybody because they're much bigger. So I think demonstrating and being very focused on a specific challenge that you can solve for them is much more effective when you're doing it that way. And that'll get you to stand out rather than saying, hey, we're a web design company, right? Big deal, right? But if you can find something specific within web design, we are the experts at doing multi-site platforms on Drupal, right? That is much more specific. And if you've done your homework and you've built your list properly, and you're targeting those types of companies that have that type of content management system, you're going to cut through way more than you're going to cut through by saying you're just a web design company. But if you're doing small businesses, they probably don't care what CMS or even know what a CMS, necessarily is. So I think, again, being very hyper-focused is really what you're going to need. And, I guess another difference that you're going to need to think about when you're doing enterprise is that, when you're doing small businesses, there might only be one or two, maybe three decision makers, right? There's the owner, maybe someone head of marketing, versus when you're doing enterprise. I mean, some of the lists we have are enormous. When you're targeting a pharma brand, there might be 200 people with marketing titles in that pharma brand. And it's like, where do you even begin to reach out? Because you probably can't reach out to all 200 of them. So, so I think, getting very specific on, who is the right buyer for that. So you can take that list of 200 and, try to really narrow it down to those that are experiencing that specific problem that you have a solution for. So I think that's another difference. And the third thing I'll say is personalization. I think, again, you can sort of get away, maybe not as much anymore, but, when you're doing smaller mid-sized businesses, maybe you can get away with a little bit more of a mass approach. But what we see in more enterprise, like, it has to be hyper personalized. You have to take the time to research the company, research the individual. Otherwise you're just not going to cut through at all. So I think those are kind of some three takeaways there.
I'm really glad I asked this question. That's awesome advice. And the last one, and maybe we can answer this a little bit more quickly, although it's not a quick question. Oliver is asking, how should we sell our services differently in the upcoming recession in terms of messaging, tweaks in sales pitch, pricing, if anything?
Yeah, well, I wish I had a crystal ball, but I can tell you at least how we're thinking about this. At least with our business, at the end of the day, right, a recession is may or may not be happening, but companies still need to grow. They may need to grow more now than ever before. So I think keeping that in mind first and foremost is key, right? That they're still going to need to grow their businesses. Now, granted, budgets might be tighter in a recession than they would have been before. So you may want to think about, how can you creatively price your services? And I don't necessarily mean that means slash, your prices, but can you go to more of a value-based pricing model? Can you maybe, keep your pricing, but add some additional value on top of the service that you have? So I think, thinking through the pricing, is something that you might want to explore. And then obviously adjusting your messaging, the pain point that somebody was experiencing a year ago that might have been working great for you in your campaigns, that pain might be different now that there's a recession. We always talk about focusing on a pivotal problem, something that's urgent and important to solve. So what is now urgent is probably different because of what's happening in the recession and how they're trying to target, because they're having problems just like you, right? They're trying to reach customers that might not be spending as much anymore. So I think adjusting your messaging and being really relevant to what's happening in the moment right now. What we do here is we do these 30-day sprints. So we're every 30 days kind of re-examining what's happening. And in the pandemic, it worked out really well because it did feel like, I don't even know, every day it felt like something was changing and different, and I think it's really important, that, you don't just set a campaign and let it run for, months on end, because things are changing so rapidly these days.
Thanks. Thanks, Christian. If we had a crystal ball, that's right. Okay. Christian, where can people go to find out more about you and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the best place would be to go to our website. So christianbanach.com would be the best place to check out more about us. On that website, if you're interested in diving deeper into our philosophy on Outbound, there's a free masterclass that we offer. So you can register online there. Or if you want to, talk specifically about some challenges that you're experiencing, or, I'd love to hear from you. You can, drop me an email through the website. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. It's Christian Banach. I don't think there's other Christian Banachs out there, so should be able to find me pretty easily.